as I said, it's regulated at retail and MRGP, maximum refinery gate price, which now is changed to the Saudi CP import price. But because of the definition in the regulation, it's still catered under MRGP. And then we indicated that the industry margins are determined using regulatory accounting system. So, Chair, here we have the BFP, which is the cost of importing product until it arrives at the port of entry. And then you have all these local factors that are introduced to get the product to the end users, introduced by the government in consultation with stakeholders. Next slide, I think is the last one. Next slide. Thank you. Chair, as I finish my presentation, we just want to go through some of the frequently asked questions that the department faces from time to time. So as I finish my presentation, we just want to go through some of the first one is why the fuel price is changing every month. Chair, this is in the fuel price, the basic fuel price working rules. It was agreed with the stakeholders. However, it's not cast in stone. If the consumers or if any of the stakeholders feel that it should be changed to a particular period, then we have to follow the same process of consultation until we arrive at whatever we want to do. What is over or under recovery? Chair, because our prices are adjusted at the beginning of the month, it means that when the oil companies goes into the market to buy finished product, they are either paying the same price that we said at the beginning of the month, or they are paying more. In which case, if they are paying more, then they are under recovery. But if they are paying less than the price that we said at the beginning of the month, then it means they're over recovering. That's where the terms really come from. And if they're over recovering, it means the following month the petrol price will go down. If they're under recovering, it means the following month the petrol price will go up to make for what they're under recovered. Why is petrol cheaper in neighboring countries and yet they purchase it from South Africa? Here we are really referring to the SACU member states because they're supplied by South Africa. Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland, and so on. Now, firstly, those countries buy from South Africa at the BFP price. So remember, the BFP price does not include the local factors because the local factors are applicable to South African market. So they buy at BFP price. Then when it goes to their own countries, then it will include, of course, transport costs to get it from South Africa to their countries. Once it arrives there, then they include their own local factors, which South Africa has nothing to do with those. Now, the reason it's cheaper is because our local factors and their local factors are different. We have the fuel levy and the road extent fund, which they do not have. And this accounts to almost 6 rand on our fuel price for petrol and diesel. Why is Sasol not selling petrol at lower prices? Because they produce it from coal. Firstly, maybe the straight answer is that in a regulated environment, you cannot have more than one price that is regulated. So Sasol is also compelled to sell at a regulated price. But we must also not think that it's cheaper because they produce it from coal. Actually, that plant in itself is more expensive to operate than a normal crude oil refinery. Why is government not deregulating fuel prices? The straight answer to that, Chair, is that our market is not ready for deregulation. We still have few companies that are dominating in the market. We have a situation where we call an oligopoly, where about 6 main players that are controlling almost all the petroleum products that are sold in the country. Now, if you want wholesalers to compete on price, the playing field has to be level first. Unfortunately, most of these new wholesalers are customers of these big companies. Therefore, you cannot compete with them on price. That's one of the reasons, Chair. We need to first level the playing field, transform the sector. Once it's ready to compete on prices, then we can deregulate, which is what the white paper on energy is saying, actually. First, prepare the market. When it's ready, then you deregulate. Why is 95 more expensive than ULP 93 in Gauteng? We talked about the demand side management levy of 10 cents. That's the reason why it's more expensive than 93. Why is the government not buying oil from African countries at lower prices? We can say that the government does not buy oil per se, it's the oil companies themselves. But from the reports that we get on imports, We know that they are buying crude oil from Nigeria, they're buying crude oil from Angola. In fact, more than 50% of our crude oil now come from these two African countries. But of course, it's not at a lower price because the price is determined by OPEC. So maybe in terms of transportation and other, it could be attractive to buy from African countries. But also remember that the refineries are also designed to use a specific kind of crude oil. And most of it coming from West Africa is suitable for our refineries because of their technology, which is very, very old technology. Chair, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. We would like to hand over back to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, TG, and your team. Honorable members, are there anything? Are you still in the house, honorable members? I take it that you have said, I said the hand of Honorable Masaule. It's the only hand. I see Honorable Matogwe.
Yeah.
I see the face of Honorable Mylan. Oh, okay, yes. Okay.
While I've got you on the phone, next week we're actually discussing basic fuel prices in committee today. But next week is power ships and RMIPP, and I think it's going to be a humdinger.
Can you mute Honorable Mylan? Can you mute? Thank you. It's gonna be Honorable Masaule, Honorable Matogwe, then Honorable Mylan.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just have one or two questions. But first, let me welcome the presentation, well prepared, well executed, if I may add that. Many things that personally I didn't understand came to light today. Maybe, Chair, let's start with the 15% premium that is directed to South Africa. And Mr. Make said it was due to situations at the time. And I want to know which time. Are we talking about apartheid time? Are we talking about what time? Because he further says they are seized with the issue and looking at whether they can evaluate from time to time and whether the situation is still relevant. Which situation will that be? And how far are they with the evaluation if it was apartheid and if it was anything else? Let's get clarity on that 15% premium that is directed to South Africa because of situations of that time that he did not clarify further. Chair, I do have a problem with diesel not being regulated. And the first time when we came to the 6th Parliament, I asked this question when the same presentation was made. Not the same presentation, but it was on petrol prices. The explanation at the time if I still recall, by the minister himself, was that because I was saying, why do you exclude diesel users from being regulated? And the issue was that during apartheid, farmers were given an exception because of the understanding that they had to service the country in terms of food and food security. I don't know why that is the case, because this is the economy and the market. If it can further be clarified why we do have, for instance, when prices are changed, there will be somebody who say diesel will also go up in 13 cents or so. Who determines that if we don't regulate that? I just want to understand deeply what is happening in the deregulation of diesel, and everything else is going up, and it doesn't stay the same. Who is this person who determines that no, it's not regulated, but let's say 42 cents were going up on diesel as well? Thank you very much, Chair.
Mama talk, go back. Honorable Matop, I can't see her now.
Yeah, I doubt if she's in the meeting now, Chair. Maybe it's a network issue.
She was in the meeting, and her hand was up. Honorable Mailam, can you continue now? Don't worry, you are forgiven.
Thank you, Chairperson. I appreciate it. Sorry about that. When I put my hand up, I unmuted myself. I'd also like to thank the department for the presentation. It is very similar to the one that we saw at the start of the 6th Parliament, but I do have a couple of questions. So let me start with the question that on the one slide, Mr. Marke, you talk about the freight premium, 15% freight premium. And you said you look at it from time to time, and you indicated that that is a hangover from a long time ago. But I mean, surely there is an urgent need to be in negotiations with the freight companies to get that taken away. It's an unfair trade practice to charge us a premium and not charge other countries. So I would urge you to not just review it from time to time, but to take steps to reduce that and get rid of that freight premium, because it's unfair on South African consumers. The second thing is you talk about the demurrage cost, and you talk about building in 3 days of demurrage at South African ports. And I'd really like to get some clarity on an issue that is bothering me a little bit. So first of all, the ports that take refined and crude in are Saldanha, Cape Town, and Durban primarily. If I think I'm correct on that. But what worries me is we are going to be putting power ships at Saldanha, and the power ship will have a second ship next to it, a fuel storage regasification unit ship next to it. And then from time to time, there will be another ship that will offload liquid gas into the FSRU. Now, all of that may have an impact on the ability of ships delivering to get into the harbor, which may have an impact on the demurrage costs. Has that been considered? And if so, what are you doing about it? My third question relates to what is being done to smooth the pricing of fuel. So we have these huge swings from month to month. And it strikes me that there is a need for a level of consistency where we rather than reviewing fuel prices on a monthly basis, we look at reviewing prices on a quarterly or half-yearly basis and building some storage into the system, building some fat into the system so that we can address these radical swings of price. My last question, I'm concerned that over 37% of the price of fuel in South Africa, the retail price of fuel in South Africa, is government taxes, specifically the Road Accident Fund and the fuel levy. These are things that government has direct control over. Now, the Road Accident Fund is a disaster. Yesterday, they were told that they cannot pay out any more claims, that any claims that are coming in, they were told by a court that any claims that are coming in must not be paid out until they've sorted out their finances. And yet we are pumping billions of rand into this entity that is mired in fraud, mired in mismanagement, and frankly, it's unacceptable. Now, I'd really like to know what your department's recommendations are to reduce the government taxes on fuel. Because what we have now is untenable. The fuel prices are destroying South Africa's economy. And frankly, the Road Accident Fund and even the proposed RABS bill that has been put on the table, you're basically going to have two schemes running parallel to each other for at least 20 to 30 years because of vested interests in the Road Accident Fund, even if you were to end it today or to transition it to RABS today. But surely the time has come to follow the best practices of the rest of the world and make a user pays principle for road accident liability, rather than charging everybody for some people who have car accidents. What I'm saying is we should build that into the licensing of the vehicles rather than into the fuel price. It is unfair and it is unsustainable the way it is now. Thank you, Chair. Let me leave it there.
Chair.
Oh, sorry, I didn't unmute. Sorry, I say Honorable. I was talking when I'm muted, but I was
Chair.
also. Yes, Honorable.
With your indulgence, can I abuse you and ride on what something that Honorable Mailam has said? I just want to further probe before they answer the question.
Can you take just a little bit of a breather? Let me give Honorable Matoga, then I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Honorable Matoga, I see now you are back.
Yes, I'm back, Chairperson. Thank you very much. I'm not sure what happened to my gadget. I just got disconnected. But anyway, I hope I'm audible enough where I am right now. I'd also just like to welcome the report from the department, which is quite detailed. But also I just need to register as well in terms of the time that we got the report. I understand that my colleagues have been in the portfolio long enough and they're able to refer to some of the things that are being mentioned. However, for me, it was very hard to actually process most of the information, especially considering the fact that we got the report like 7:30 last night. But nonetheless, the the questions that I had as well, I think they might have been covered when I was disconnected. But it was basically, we hear the challenges that the department is speaking about, but then what becomes the way forward. And then also there are a number of factors as well that were discovered in terms of what affects the fuel price. I think even when we went to SFF, for instance, there was the issue of a syndicate that was dealing fuel, and at the time there was an issue that the department is still trying to find a way around that. So I wanted to find out if any inroads have been made. And then also on the issue of fuel as well, considering the fact that paraffin is actually being used by the poorest of the poor as well, to sort of curb the rising fuel prices.
We lost you, Honorable Matoke, again.
Seems he's out, Chair.
I am in, Chair. I'm not sure what's happening.
Okay. Look, if you happen, just for the sake of fairness, if you happen to be cut off, you are allowed to write on the wall if the network is not improving. Mm-hmm. I'm the only one who's disadvantaged, that whether network or not network, I have to check.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
okay.
Continue, Rabmato.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson.
You see where you are sitting and the way you are sitting, don't even shake your head. Just stay straight as you are. We hear you very well.
All right, no problem, Chairperson. So I was just saying as well that we are just now going to discuss the issue of refineries, where even that the report is not looking good. And there's also the implication that we might have to rely on fuel products, on imports, particularly for fuel products, which therefore means that will also put another strain not only on the fuel prices, but also on paraffin. So we need to actually have a long-term plan in terms of how we're going to regulate fuel prices. Also, the month-to-month adjustment is not really sustainable. I think those were the things that I wanted to raise, Chairperson. I hope that I was not cut off much. Thank you.
Okay. Open the second part, Honorable Masaule.
Thank you very much, Chair. You know, Chair, Honorable Malam has just raised a very important question that I think I agree with him, that you see, when you deal with road accident fund and place it on fuel, the prediction is that in the near future we'll be using electrified vehicles, which may have nothing to do with fuel. What then would happen when it comes to that? And I agree with him that it should be placed in vehicle licensing, because you have a car, you have a possibility to have an accident, but that should not be placed on fuel, because you may have a car that does not consume fuel. So I just wanted to expand on that issue, so that when they give a response, maybe indicate, is there a thinking of the future when it comes to RAF and its misplacement, in my view, on the fuel levy. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. DG, can you answer that, please?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. I'm trying to unmute here. I don't know if I'm audible. DDG Makubela, can you start? Then Mr. Make will follow.
No, thank you very much, DG. And thanks, Honorable Chair and Honorable members for the question. As DG indicated, I'll start and then Mr. Make will deal with the questions that I have not covered sufficiently. The first question from Honorable Masaole about the 15% premium, and I think that was also asked by Honorable Maila. The premium on freight originally was about during the time of the transition from the sanctions era into the post-democratic dispensation. That was effectively included because of that. However, there then was another consideration, and that the shippers then said it is very dangerous to bring vessels to the southern tip of Africa because of the pirating that was taking place. And that is why that 15% survived the post-democratic era, because we had a massive challenge of pirating along the coast. In fact, even now, the South African Navy still helps patrol the routes that vessels traverse to come to the southern part of the continent. There was a response globally where countries then deployed navies to try and curb this pirating. I must say that now it has come down. We believe that it is time that we revisit that. But again, it is going to depend on whether there are no flare-ups of pirating activities along the route. Then the second question on diesel regulation. I think that the white paper, what we had set as an objective, the white paper on energy policy, was that we would migrate towards deregulation. And I think that is the challenge that we face as the policy department, that the government's intent is to systematically try and move things towards mimicking what happens in the market. And I think that intent then has made us to be hesitant in re-regulating diesel. Diesel is definitely deregulated. Actually, in our view, we should be seeing differences in the prices of diesel from the different players. And in some instances, we do see that, but we don't think it is sufficient. But that is because currently, as we speak, we import over 30% of our diesel requirements. So we don't produce in the country the diesel requirements that we have. But it is something that we really believe that we should not migrate towards the regulation of diesel. It is quite unfortunate that when predictions are made about price changes, there isn't a qualification made to say that the wholesale list price of diesel is going to change by this much, in the predictions, because it is the wholesale. It doesn't mean the pump price should change by that much. And I do maybe Chair want to say this. I drive a diesel vehicle and I do shop around, and I do find differences in the prices of diesel. And that is because of the fact that it is not regulated at the pump. On the issue of, the farmers and so on, in our view, the fact that diesel is not regulated allows industry to negotiate hard with the oil companies. Because if we were to regulate diesel, then it could be that the oil majors would say, but this is the price that government wants us to sell diesel at. And therefore that benefit would not be passed on to the consumer in terms of making sure that our industries can be more competitive. Then again, I think when we talk about regulation in South Africa, we always have to balance security of supply and this deregulation. Currently, we are preoccupied as a department with the security of supply. We don't want to get to a situation where we have regular shortages of fuel. Categorically, I can say that we only have fuel shortages when there are, labor disputes, but also secondly, when, we have unusual events like the one that we had last year with COVID-19. And that is because the regulatory mechanism on pricing, is supportive of security of supply. If you make drastic changes to the regulatory environment, you will see the response. One, you would see, flight of capital flight. That I think would be what would happen. The second one is that you would then basically start in the short term until you invest in import infrastructure. You would start seeing, those sporadic shortages of fuel. Now, on let me answer. Mr. Make will deal with the demurrage issue raised by Honorable Mailem, but I must say that the power ships will have no impact whatsoever on the demurrage, because the ports that have been identified don't play a significant role. If it was Cape Town, I think would be, concerned. If it was Durban itself, would be concerned. But I think the ports that have been identified, we don't believe that will have an impact on the other liquid fuels. Then on the issue of price smoothing, I think that we need to be quite careful about this one, because you could find that you try and do price smoothing by having prices change on a quarterly basis, and then the spike may be bigger. What we did last year, and I think we tried to explain it here, is that when COVID hit, we with the advice of our principals, we took a decision to say, pass every cent to the consumer, pass every cent of that decrease to the consumer, because then that enables the cost of doing business to come down. And in fact, we believe that that was the correct decision because the Reserve Bank was then able to lower interest rates given the impact on fuel in the basket of goods that are considered. That reduction in interest rates, we believe that is still benefiting the consumer up to today. Had we held back to say that let's only pass 50 cents, I think that room would not have been created for the Reserve Bank to move. On the issue of the road accident fund, firstly, I want to say that most of our trading partners have got fuel taxes that exceed 45%. And that is a fact. Some in Europe, if you include the environmental taxes, they are about 60% of the fuel price. That's what makes fuel in Europe in particular to be so high. However, I think that the whole issue of the road accident fund, we would agree that it would need to be looked at. We don't have the solution because it sits outside our portfolio. I would agree that what has been raised by Honorable Masaule is actually a looming danger. And that needs to be looked at, that when you start introducing electric vehicles, the room to maneuver for raising funding for the road accident fund through fuel will diminish. The room will be smaller and smaller and actually will disappear. So there is a need for policy considerations in that regard. I think the rest I'll hand over to Mr. Mark if I've missed any question. Thank you very much, DG. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, DDG. I think maybe you covered almost all the questions. There's just one that was raised by Honorable Madokwe regarding the BFP on IP, on paraffin and so on, given that the local refineries are going to shut down. I think the concern was that it might lead to price increases. So we want to assure her that the BFP is already based on import price. So even if the refineries can shut down, that won't necessarily lead to higher prices. The main concern, as DDG said, will only be on security of supply of this product in the country. The one on demurrage, I think DDG also covered it very well, because the demurrage that we're talking about is applicable to petrol, diesel, and IP when you bring them to South Africa. So when you have the floating gas storage facilities and so on, that's a different matter altogether. If it's going to attract any demurrage, then it has to have its own calculation and the basis for that particular demurrage. But I don't have enough information on that because it's not necessarily regulated per se, the prices by the department. And we haven't really started discussing that. We can only discuss once we start having these facilities and so on. I think the last one, Chair, I wanted to add here is the 15% premium. I think DDG covered it very well. Just to clarify that the London Tanker Brokers Panel, the guys who publish this freight, they don't add the 15%. They give you the freight, which is a number, the freight, the cost of transporting fuel to South Africa. Now, the shippers to South Africa comes to us and say, when we go and get these ships to bring product to South Africa, we pay additional premium. And this is the amount that we are paying is additional premium to the freight that is already a published number. So in order for us to review, then we'll need these shippers to then give us the actual cost that they're paying for this premium so that we can look at the average and look at how we can incorporate in pricing. Is it still 15%? Is it higher? Is it lower? Should it be removed? So that's the information that then we'll have to source from the actual companies that are bringing product to South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, DG. Thanks, Mr.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Matkubela and Mr. Maka. Chair, I hope the team has adequately responded to the questions. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, DG. Honorable members, at the end of the day, someone must take responsibility. My apologies, Honorable Madog. I will do a follow-up. Yes, the problem is that for some of us, just being the chair, sometimes you get first the documentation and you assume when it is approved, it's already having to go through. I was not aware that it was received very late, the documentation, but we will work on that. I'm sure it's an error that we must apologize for. Number two, I want us, honorable members, maybe down the line, and agree that from where we sit as a committee, it's impossible to think of exhausting this issue just for having a session today. But I will try and make a proposal towards the end. But I don't know, Mr. Mark, in your presentation, almost at the beginning, where it talks about the use of the pipeline, what, payment to NERSA and or payment on behalf of NERSA. I just need clarity. I couldn't get a sense of what does that mean. Does that mean the state pays service providers for the pipeline granted to or by NERSA? If I can just get clarity on that issue. The second part is what honorable members were raising. I think let's agree, which is why I said, well, I don't think we can exhaust this issue now. We need to think outside the box. The point, amongst other things, is our own domestic or local taxations. What needs to be done? Probably there needs to be a complete or a radical shift in the manner in which we do. We may see only rough, but maybe at the end of the day, when we engage on the sum total of the domestic or local taxations, we may arrive on one thing, that probably most of those domestic or local taxations are not necessarily located where they are supposed to be. And I don't think there's something wrong. It's what I think, for me, even the department must make a consideration of that. Thirdly, is to look beyond what we have been talking about. And I know it's a controversial issue that there's always been arguments. What are the other alternatives that we can look at in terms of the issue of the fuel? I know there's been a very serious debate. I don't want to take an ideological stance on the matter. I'm just raising to say there might be, it will help if the department, where possible, help us to reshape our thinking beyond what is normal or what is ordinary in front of our eyes. Do we still have the concerns, risks, or challenges? Because anything that we don't engage with, it leaves people much more narrow in terms of knowledge. I remember there was a debate about the issues of food security when it comes to issues of biofuel. It would be nice that when we talk on those issues, we go deeper. The biomass, what is the view, and help us, because from time to time you need to renew. Unfortunately, governments are like that from time to time there could be a new team or an introduction of new people in the scheme of things. I'm worried about the fact that the presentation does not help us much. It's very good, it's well informative, but it's telling us about what is currently happening. It's not telling us about options or possible options and what could be the disadvantages of those options if they are presented here. So that we can then move from a premise that says, we are really left with what we have in front of us, and therefore we have to respond to this in the manner that we are given. But if there is a thought out of the box, I think it must help us to say, if we look at other alternatives, here are the limitations of these alternatives if we take them. The last issue, I must say, with all due respect, Honorable Mashaule, Honorable Mailam, and Honorable Maddo, that I know here, maybe when we go back to our principles, there are certain questions that we must think outside the box. When you look at the fact that in terms of the endowment, the report says 50% of our crude oil probably is from the African continent. And I've always raised this question, and I'm saying this thing because most of our delegations or members of parliament are delegations to the Pan-African Parliament. To what extent can these issues find expression within the Pan-African Parliament in terms of trade? Because this, to me, is one of the biggest opportunities that Africa can tap from, if it is worked properly for the benefits, not just of the African continent, even the globe, but on the basis of fair trade. I'm of the view that the point that is being raised here about the well-established role players and the need for transformation and so forth can only happen also if it is much more broader in the way and the manner that we look at. So when we talk about free trade within the African continent, at what point some of these issues find expression? So I'm just saying, maybe something that in our own parties, when we go back, let's try and refine and see whether we can get a common ground to say part of the packages that we can carry is that intra-trade within Africa can be enhanced only if we look at these particular options. And I'm interested also to know now from the department as part of the executive, that is it something that our government is also making a consideration on how best these can be shared for the benefit? I'm not saying it should be anti-trade with others, but how do we want to harmonize trade in relation to this endowment that we're having in our continent? So I'm not sure whether DG you would want to share with this thing, but I want, whilst we're still gonna go to other presentation, I might be making a recommendation on how best we can take this process forward, because I don't think only us who are members of the committee, the department, or generally parliament and government possess supernatural wisdom to provide solutions. The truth of the matter is that if we make a proper analysis of the impact of the food of the fuel prices, it goes beyond just transport and other things. It has got a direct impact on our socio-economic situation. But DG, if you want to have a take, can you?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. We really appreciate the guidance that you have just provided. I think I will start with the last submission that we have made of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Now, we know for a fact that the agreement promises us a greater market opportunities. There will be more trade and investment, and we'll be able to derive a greater value, in terms of looking at the productivity market opportunities. Now, what you have raised, Chair, it's a matter that we would internalize it in the department. We will wait for yourself in terms of a guidance, because today we came here to give an overall picture of the status quo. Now, we understand that, there is a need, in line with the inputs that honorable members have made. Some of the issues are policy issues, that we would need to have a concerted conversation around those issues. But by and large, Chair, I think the guidance is welcome, and we would, in due course, based on the guidance that you'll provide to us, because we understand that it is not only about us having to live with what you are having at the moment, is to how can we change and be more responsive to the current issues that we are confronted with. I don't know if maybe there will be an addition from Mr. Makubela. DDG?
No, thank you, DG. DG, I think maybe just two issues from my side. One is that, as the chair has indicated, I think we need to come back to talk about what the options are. And I must say that the afternoon's presentation begins to talk to those. Perhaps what is not covered in the afternoon's presentation is what the chair referred to, and that is biofuel. I think that it is something that we are looking at as a department, and I think given the challenges that the sugar industry is having, it is an area that needs to be looked at even more because it can unlock economic activity, but also then begin to moderate the price of fuel, but also balance of payments, because we would then be producing that locally. But Chair, we've taken the guidance, and as DG indicated, when called upon, we will come back and give more detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair and honorable members.
DG, we did not respond to the first question by the chair on the tariffs.
Okay, can you come? Yes, deal with it, Mr. Mackey.
Okay, thank you, DG. Chair, the issue around the pipeline is as follows. The pipeline is owned and operated by Transnet, and Transnet gets a tariff from NERSA on an annual basis. When the oil companies bring products, say from Durban to the Indian market through the pipeline, they pay that tariff to Transnet. Because we are using a cost recovery mechanism in our pricing system, they have to recover that cost from the levy that we mentioned is the Petroleum Pipeline Levy, which is administered by Central Energy Fund. So when they submit their claim to SEF, they'll also include a proof from NERSA that they shipped this number of the volume on this particular pipeline, and then we then refund them based on what they've already paid to Transnet. Thank you.
So, now I hear you, Mr. Mabe. It's fine. I think there's a lot. I always say I don't like to be channeled on a box. I'm now convinced there is more work that still needs to be done. If we're working in the manner that you do, that you suggest now, I'm sure certain things wouldn't be the same. I'm just thinking of other examples where that is not the route that is being followed. But it's okay. It's an issue for another day. That's why I did at some point I even raised the issue to say we need to have a broader discussion even beyond this on what is supposed to be an investment plan or investment strategy for state-owned entities, so that you don't have one entity operating this way, the other entity operate this way. One entity can have partnerships, one entity is not allowed, and all of them, one thing that is common is that in the absence of an investment plan and an investment strategy, when things don't go right, then the state must take liability. That's why I'm saying maybe beyond this issue, whatever solution we'll come up with, it must inherently be informed by overarching investment plan and investment strategy for our state-owned entities. Yeah, I thought it's you who's speaking.
Oh, no, not at all.
Oh, okay. Honorable members, I'm not sure you want me to give you a break to go and take some water whilst we are preparing AA. I don't see whether you go on a break or what. I'm just asking honorable members, do you want the 10 minutes so that we start exactly at 11? Or is AA ready and we allow them to, at least for the next 5 minutes, to put up their presentation? Honorable Masaul and Honorable Mailem, I see your mics are on, either of you.
Chair, I think we should proceed.
Yeah, I agree with Honorable Melem. We sit with our water in our corners. We stand up and go to the toilet without saying that we are going to the toilet. So
Okay.
everything is sorted.
As long as we don't see what's happening, make sure that whatever you do, your videos must be off. Probably even your mics must be muted. AA, you will introduce yourselves and your delegation. The floor is yours. You are welcome to the committee. I see there's Mr. Leighton-Beck. Yes, just when you unmute, then you can take the floor. You can unmute yourself, Mr. Beck. It's still red. Yes. Now is your volume. Is that Mr. Hunavan? We can't hear a thing. Is it only me who can't hear?
No, we can't hear him.
Yeah, I can see if your mic is not showing that you are talking. It's supposed to have an up and down running green, being green on the mic, going up and down. But yes.
But now we can't hear. Can you hear it? Can you hear it now?
Yes, we hear you now.
Can you hear us now? Start your video. No, they've also gone. There's an issue with them.
No, we hear you.
Okay, you hear me now?
Okay,
great. Okay. Can we start the video?
All
Here
right.
we go. Do you hear us now?
Is the video on? Can you see us and hear us?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So we can proceed. Right. Honorable Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. From the onset, we apologize for the late submission of our document as of this morning to no fault of the committee. So we appreciate the opportunity to proceed and to present to you. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the opportunity. Mr. Mokoena, Mr. Makubela, and Mr. Marke, thank you very much for your insights this morning and what you have shared thus far. So if everybody can hear us clearly, please indicate if you can't. We shall proceed to our presentation. Again, thank you very much for the time you have afforded us. From the onset, I need to point out that the view of the Automobile Association of South Africa is completely unpolitical. We are here to represent the interests of the consumer, and we speak from that perspective to make sure that we protect the interests and our members' interests and the public at large. With us in studio today from my end, I'm Willem Groenewald, the Chief Executive Officer of the Automobile Association of South Africa. In my presence as well, Mr. Philip Purnell, he's the Executive of PR and Communications, and Mr. Leighton Beard, who is the AA's spokesperson. So with that in mind, if we could continue, the Automobile Association was established in 1930. We've been around for 91 years, and we are consumer focused through information sharing, non-confrontational, and seeking solutions, and a clear aim for road safety, mobility awareness, and public education. Our goal is always to consider what is in the best interest of our consumers, a consumer champion. This includes members, non-members, and all road users. We are not a for-profit organization, and our aim is not for that of making money, but rather to represent consumers at large. The AA's base constitutes representation of 20% of vehicle users on the South African roads, and we are always striving to ensure ease of use and best practice for consumers. Moving on to the presentation, a lot has been said in terms of the composition of the fuel price, and the Honourable Committee and everybody that is representing today is well versed with the composition of how fuel prices are compiled and considered. To this end, we are not going to spend inordinate amount of time in terms of going back into the composition of the pricing, but we would rather like to flesh out and focus on elements of the process that we have opinion on. In terms of that, the import parity principle is well-designed, complete method of the basic fuel price determination to ensure that local refineries compete with the international counterparts. This promotes cost-effectiveness and intelligent rough acquisition strategies to ensure survival in a volatile and competitive international environment. However, the position that import parity is a well-designed, complete method of the basic fuel price determination is contested by. Longer-term comparisons between the basic fuel price and actual import data together with various other models are needed to reveal if the basic fuel price is accurately reflected a true import parity price. It's recommended to continue evaluating the Arab Gulf pricing model so as to determine if this model may be more appropriate to use as a IPP indicator in a regulated environment. The fundamental philosophy for the foundation for establishing the basic fuel price is to represent realistic market-related costs of importing a considerable quota of South Africa's liquid fuel supplies. Therefore, such supplies are obtained from overseas refinery centers that can satisfy South Africa's requirements of product quality and sustainable supply considerations. They contend that the basic fuel price is a well-designed method for the basic price determination. I cite this here to establish a base under. Dr. Rod Crompton is the director of the Energy Leadership Center at Wits Business School, an Eskom non-executive board member, and former Deputy Director General at the Department of Minerals and Energy. Hence, citing quotations from that principle as a foundation. In terms of the petroleum value chain, the following product is stored and moved a number of times between refining and vehicle tanks. Each time it is handled, there's an associated cost, which is recovered through the pricing mechanism. Currently, 3 of the country's 6 refineries are offline. Obviously, this drives importation demand. Put into perspective, total petrol and diesel imports 85,000 barrels per day pre-closure. Post-closure, imports adding another 180,000 barrels per day imported, cited through the media reference quotes. Our imports have increased significantly due to refineries being offline. And we need to establish the best cost ratio between refining and importation and what impact this has on the basic fuel price as a principle. Further to Crompton, Singford, and Simango, citing quotes, South Africa shifted from being a net exporter of refined products to being a net importer into 006. This shift calls into question the appropriateness of continuing an import substitution policy approach, partly because it is a blunt instrument which appears to be inflating petrol prices across the economy without, since 2006, achieving the intended policy objective of expanding refinery capacity in line with domestic demand. It's also wasteful in that it provides benefits to all refiners, including those that do not need protection. In addition, such cost-benefit analysis as exists indicates that import growth is preferable to refinery investment, at least in the short to medium term. The advent of electric vehicles risk refinery investments becoming stranded assets over time because the demand for fuel supplies would clearly diminish. So the question we're asking is, should we be investing more in refineries, or should we rather be seeking alternative solutions? Looking forward. It's further noted that we are not aware of a body of theory that could adequately explain the phenomenon of petrol price regulation in South Africa, again cited by Crompton. What would be of considerable benefit would be more detailed analysis of the industry. Such a methodology could be further modified to include an analysis of the drivers of the value chain dynamics, the constraints faced by actors at different levels in the value chain, and the struggles between the different actors in the value chain. A structural periodization would introduce historical dynamism into the analysis, as the changing power of the actors, groups, and institutions through history have influenced the historical trajectory. Such an analysis would provide a clearer picture of forces determining where the industry is today and where the best prospects for reform might lie, the impact of the unintended consequences and the spaces that they open up, how those spaces have been exploited, and by whom historically may assist in revealing spaces that are now open and what opportunities they may present. And again, as we said, we're here to champion the view of the consumer, and our contribution to the forum today, as we understand that the committee is limited in terms of execution of the ideas that is shared. So we are sharing our ideas to identify opportunities to improve the environment at large. Basic fuel price has not been regularly reviewed as the global markets have shifted. There's some evidence to suggest that it does not yield a true import parity price. Crompton cited once more. In relation to the basic fuel price, import parity pricing, or IPP as we refer to it, and given the above statement, the Automobile Association is of the view that further research is required to determine if the current model of BFP calculation is adequate. Consumers should be at the center of the value chain. Clearly, because consumers at large comprise the driving forces of the economy and sits at the core and the foundation of our South African economy and mobility tied to that. While the value chain is key, an approach centered on consumers must be considered, and this will require a review of the basic fuel price. Parity pricing does exist in relation to fuel exports to neighboring countries. Main reason for this is inclusion of levies in local supply. Two major levies being the General Fuel Levy and the Road Accident Fuel Levy, levy. Levies are correcting problems of past and not solving present or future challenges, we maintain. Claimed to be equitable as everyone pays, but impact is felt most severely by the poor. Too little education from government on the composition of the fuel price and its various markers, specifically on the levies and their impact. Levies cannot for now be eliminated, but must be better managed, and the process requires more transparency. What we're saying here is that we do not contest the levying of taxes through fuel pricing mechanisms, but What we are seeking is the appropriate allocation of those levies to the benefit of the consumer. The higher of two major levies currently being collected increases mostly in line with inflation, but this needs reviewing. Current taxation rate is extremely high, between 23 to 28% on every litre. Money allocated to Treasury can be utilised for any purpose. Eliminating GFL creates problems with collection. If not here, then where? South Africans want to contribute to taxes, but there must be tangible, visible benefits of doing so. Money allocated through the general fuel levy is not seen to be working for citizens and consumers. As I said a minute ago, paying the levies and paying the taxes is a wonderful thing to do when the public can see their taxes going to work, providing benefits to the money that is paid. How much of the general fuel levy is allocated to law enforcement? Current staffing levels needs are half of what they should be. Again, in terms of putting down legislation, legislating is not effective unless those legislation can be enforced and perpetrators can be brought to book, apprehended and convicted. The conviction drive is also what we're looking for, and funding through these mechanisms would enable more law enforcement on the road, visibility and law enforcement in our country. How much of the general fuel levy is allocated to road infrastructure? For instance, there are many examples countrywide of residents fixing their own potholes, especially after the summer rains. The general fuel levy must be used to fund critical elements relating to road infrastructure and law enforcement. Funding of these and other road and transport related priorities is critical. The AASA proposes that increases to the general fuel levy be halted for at least the next 5 years until issues of the allocation and the utilization of funding received through the general fuel levy has been reviewed. Concerns about money being collected but not managed or administered properly. The road accident fund is poorly managed, and it has been alluded to earlier in previous presentations in this forum. Current projections are a deficit of around 520 billion by 2023-24. Even with the collection of levies to fund the road accident fund seems to be inadequate, which points to an element within the governance structures of the way the fund is managed. The RAF versus Road Accident Benefit Scheme, RABS, government wanted to implement RABS to replace the RAF because why? As the existing fault-based compensation system administered by the Road Accident Fund, established by the Road Accident Fund Act 1996, is not effectively achieving the purpose for which it was created. However, RABS deemed too expensive to get off the ground, but there is still a need to deal with the Road Accident Fund as a matter of urgency. The question we're asking is, where is the money going? The Automobile Association is of the view that an approach based on two priorities are necessary to deal with the Road Accident Fund challenges. The first priority, the Road Accident Fund should be wholly or semi-privatized, with the private sector providing management, oversight, and accountability. In a semi-privatized scenario, private inputs must be sought on key issues relating to management and the provision of insurance services. Private sector involvement will drive down costs and provide better services to victims of crashes requiring compensation. The only way forward for a new road accident fund is through private sector involvement and public accountability. Private sector involvement in the management of risk associated with the road accident fund have now become inevitable and unavoidable. Costs are too high, and the road accident fund has effectively run out of time to rectify the situation. It runs the risk of implosion. The road accident fund itself notes on page 19 of its 2019-20 annual report that trends observed in the claims environment saw a substantial increase in claims liabilities. The statement of financial position reflects the extent to which the fund remains undercapitalized. A net deficit of 322 billion was recorded for the 2019-2020 period. Priority 2, road safety must be at the heart of what the Road Accident Fund does. In effect, better administration, better law enforcement by default inverts the claims ratio on the Road Accident Fund. Less crashes, thereby drives less exposure to the fund having to make payouts. Increased road safety will reduce the need for compensation, as I've said now. 10-to-1 return on investment in road safety. In terms of road safety, safe road use or better drivers, safe vehicle crash test technology inclusions, better post-crash intervention, safe roads and roadsides, road infrastructure, and safe speeds. An approach to deal more effectively with road crashes will benefit the economy and clearly relieve huge amounts of pressure on the road accident fund. This slide here, this briefly speaks to the cost of crashes. This is the last data that we were able to access. I'm not going to go into the balance of the slide, but the headline on this page is that 142.9 billion Rand was allocated to the cost of crashes in 2015. It's now 5 years later. This data would have moved, but it's safe to say that at minimum, it would be close to that number. As a ratio to what this is costing the economy at large. In 2015, the Road Traffic Management Corporation released the cost of crashes that you've seen now. At the time, the RTMC estimated the cost of economies of crashes at 143 billion, extrapolated to account for a year-on-year inflation at 5%. This amount in 2021 should be in the region of 191 billion. Investment in road safety is non-negotiable in dealing with problems faced by the Road Accident Fund, and reducing the number of crashes reduces the number of fatalities, thereby reducing reliance on the Road Accident Fund. Current numbers do not indicate meaningful reductions in road fatalities, function of the RTMC. Therefore, the need is higher if the aim is to reduce the cost of the Road Accident Fund. South Africa has huge reliance on fuel. The masses within our economy makes use of public transport, the commuting environment. 15 million commuters per day makes use of public transport, hence a massive reliance on fuel, not to speak about the commercial elements of business being reliant on fuel to drive the economy and the businesses. Reliance on fuel can be mitigated through provision of ameliorated mobility solutions such as bike lanes, e-bikes. The issue of bicycles, e-bikes and bike lanes has not been fully explored in South Africa and needs more intensive scrutiny. Reliance on fuel pushes this discussion back, but it should be brought forward as a means of easing the reliance on fuels. International practice is to reduce reliance on fuels for environmental reasons mainly, but in a country such as South Africa, this has major positive implications. Greener fuels are unavailable in South Africa, yet there's a carbon tax on fuels. There's no alternative to using the current available fuels, yet motorists are being penalized for having to pay carbon taxes, even though they have no choice. Investment in the provision of safe, reliable, affordable public and commercial transport is necessary. Current offerings do not offer any of the above. An increase in public transport usage will consequently reduce individual reliance on fuel. More investment needs to be made in Transnet to ensure the pressure on freight is relieved through increased use of rail. And we all know what our highways look like by the increase of road freight and the big problem faced as well in terms of that on overloading and the damage of our roads infrastructure. Touch on several issues which we believe will mitigate the basic fuel price. To recap, these are a review of the basic fuel price calculations, research analysis into best model for IPP pricing models, review of levies, involvement of private sector in operations and the management of the road accident fund, massive investments in road safety to offset costs of compensation and cost of the economy, reduction on the reliance on fuels. However, a critical element I have not touched on yet is the general state of the economy, which has an irrefutable impact on fuel pricing. In this regard, we offer the following comments. It has become clear that corruption is pervasive in our society, and with your indulgence, I will read through some quotes shared over the last period. State capture and corruption has been undermined, has undermined investor confidence, and public trust eroded key institutions of the state and diverted resources intended to support development. Addressed by President Cyril Ramaphosa at the opening of the Presidential Job Summit, Gallagher Estate, October 4, 2018. We resolved to cure our country of the corrosive effects of the corruption and to restore the integrity of our institutions, so did the nation address by President Cyril Ramaphosa, February 7, 19. In response to the dire situation at several of our state-owned enterprises where mismanagement and corruption had several undermined their effectiveness, we have taken decisive measures to improve governance, strengthen leadership, and restore stability in strategic entities. State of the Nation address by President Cyril Ramaphosa, Parliament, February 7, 19. Good governance is a prerequisite for an effective development of state and more sustained investment, both of which are needed to fuel growth and job creation. Addressed by Deputy President Ramaphosa on the occasion of the 22nd Annual NEDLAC Summit, 8 September 17. Issues of government impact on investment and the economy in general. The fuel price is a symptom of the economy. If issues of governance impact on the economy and the fuel price is a symptom of the economy, then fuel price is impacted by macro and micro issues of good governance. For instance, a weaker rand-dollar exchange is impacted by economic policy uncertainty, ratings downgrades, government spending, corruption, rising unemployment. Cost of bailouts, examples, SABC, Parity, Eskom, Continental, etc., between 2000 to 2020 is at 187 billion, according to Finance Minister Tito Mboweni. Government wage bill in 2019 recorded at 745 billion. Fuel levies, taxes goes into the fiscus. Earlier we put into question the allocation of the funds. How much of those funds are landing in these channels, mitigating these challenges, and how much of that goes to the benefit of the consumer at the end of the day? Given the above, we believe it is necessary for government to provide evidence of good governance and success in dealing with burning issues. Corruption, bailouts, government wage bill will improve investor confidence in South Africa. In the end, the abuse of good governance, particularly at those agencies who benefit most from fuel taxes, does not contribute to citizens' willingness to pay taxes, does not attract investors, leads to rating downgrades, creates a weaker economy, and leads to weaker currencies, has a knock-on effect on local fuel pricing. In the end, we need to ask ourselves what success would like for consumers, and they ask themselves these hard questions about fuel pricing in South Africa. In our view, that would be an audit of existing protocols and calculations, extensive research on the fuel value chain which informs decisions, better allocation of funds generating through general fuel levy and road accident fund levies, better policing, better road infrastructure, better public transport, safer roads, safer drivers, better post-crash intervention and care, better education awareness campaigns, evidence of good governance in the utilization of funds from the general fuel levy and the road accident fund, a better structured, more transparent fuel pricing mechanism which delivers correct audited data that the public can rely on, and certainly the taxes collected are being allocated appropriately. Economic climate influences local prices, even if SA government does not have influence over international petroleum prices. Alternatives for current distribution, value chain must be revisited. Need for review, revision of current calculations, including of factors which comprise the basic fuel price. Alternatives for current transportation, bikes, e-bikes, bike lanes, reliance on current fuels must be reduced. Public transport must be reliable, affordable, efficient. The road accident fund needs urgent intervention. Funding for road safety initiatives to be sharply increased. General fuel levy increases to be halted, ring fence for specific actions. Basic fuel price is comprised of several elements, and so too is any consideration of how to mitigate the rising costs. There is no silver bullet. It will be requiring a multifaceted, multi-layered, multi-departmental approach. With that, we conclude. Honourable Chairman, honourable members of the committee, we thank you very much for your time and affording us the opportunity to present to you. Once again, apologies for the late submission of the presentation. And we are thankful and grateful that we've had the opportunity to share with you. Back to you, Honourable Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, and your team. The only thing is the advantage is that we're seeing the presentation on the screen, but I've already noticed that members were a little bit disadvantaged. We will request next time. I know maybe your volume that side is not increasing that much, but it was difficult to listen. But because the presentation was in front of us, that's why I didn't stop. There was a request that you at least you try and up your voice. I'm sure when we deal with questions and answers, let's get the voice a little bit jacked up so that we are not disadvantaged on the very good contributions. And I think let's appreciate the presentation. It's a little bit informative, but let not be the first one to make an opinion as if I'm priming up members what to do. Honorable members, here is a presentation. Are there any take? I see the hand of Honorable Mylem. Any other hand? I see the hand of Honorable Mashaule. Okay, Honorable Mylem, then Honorable Mashaule. I won't come, I will only come after the two of you have finished, except if there's another hand in between.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I'd really like to appreciate the presentation. I do have one concern, and that is that, well, maybe it's a comment, maybe it's a concern, maybe it's a question. So let me start with the question. Is the AA in discussion with the Department of Energy regarding a review of the BFP? And if not, why not? And then related to that is a comment. I really think that the department needs to urgently commence that review of the BFP to see whether it's the best practice, whether it is the best methodology for determining a fuel price for South Africa. And if it's not, we need to make every effort to find the best model for determining that fuel price. So right now, and this should be an ongoing thing, the department should be consulting people like the AA and bringing them on board and saying, let's look at this, let's review it, let's see what we can do, because South Africa's consumers are suffering. Thank you, Chair.
May I proceed, Chair?
Yes, I said so. I said when you are done, except if there is another member in between.
No, thank you very much, Chair. I want to phrase my question differently to probably the first comment made by Honorable Mylem on the relationship with SEF, and ask AA, what is their source of information when it comes to predicting the petrol prices, except the information that we get from SEF. In other words, if SEF was to not exist tomorrow, and next week we have to release petrol price changes, would they be able to do that? And if yes, how? Where do they get the formula? How is it? How do they get that information? Because in most cases, in the presentation made by Mr. Make, he said it's the minister only who has authority to determine, following the formula used by SEF, to publish that. I'm saying if the minister was not to publish such, would they continue giving the public information, or they rely on SEF information? And if they rely on SEF information, why are they not acknowledging that fact to the public. Thank you very much.
Okay, can I allow AA to respond or take a note on the issues raised? You'll bear with us. We ask these questions in the manner we do. We hope you have taken notes. And if it's a comment, if you feel that you don't want to respond in the comment, or that you are free to do so, but you have made a presentation, let me allow you then to make a take. You'll decide who responds on the questions or on the comments.
Honourable Chairman, thank you very much. Willem Groenewald, to respond first. In terms of the first question, the AA is certainly not in discussions with the DMRE regarding the audit or the recalculation of the basic fuel price. It is not something that has come up prior, so the answer to that is no. Secondly, the determination of fuel pricing, we rely completely on the CEF, which is the Central Energy Fund. And in the absence of that data, we would not be able to forecast or announce or predict any pricing whatsoever.
Okay.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So just in response to Mr. Makhlohule's question as well, we, and as Mr. Groenewald has just indicated, we obviously make use of the KEF data without which we would not be able to make this determination. It is a fact that is mentioned in every single one of our press releases that is issued to the media. We make note of the fact that we rely on unaudited data from the KEF to make these determinations. We also make very clearly known that the Automobile Association does not adjust the price, nor do we have any input into its regulation. And those facts are known to the media to which we supply this data. I mean, as a last point, the reason we supply this information is as a consumer service. We provide this data in order to assist consumers to be aware of what the potential changes to the fuel price could be. And we do this so that they are able to budget properly, but also we feel it's an important education aspect that we perform in the absence of any other data relating to the fuel price except the adjustment prices themselves.
Okay, honorable members, I think there is that take. Look, thank you with the presentation. I think what is good, and I must say this to AA, what is good is that you, in your presentation, you have highlighted that no silver bullet will resolve the challenge that we're having. And again, with what I was raising, I think there is a need to find one another on different options. Yes, to some degree, you have looked also in terms of the developments that are taking place in terms of the motor industry and the possibilities that might arise if they saw over-reliance on fuel. One other part that for me, and I've always argued this, although I may take it even further and say it depends the nature of training and mass education. How does it take in order to make sure that we reduce the cost? First, we reduce carnage, but also we reduce the cost of claims. in relation to it. It also, again, I must say, depends whether finally we agree on the fact that where this domestic taxation is located will remain there. But secondly, as I take it as a short-term intervention now, is to look on the work that has to be done. I think I would agree, I've always argued that if you've got someone who gets a driver's license today by driving from one point less than even 50 kilometers, and that person is granted a license, and the first time that person takes a long trip of about 600 kilometers, or a person gets a license is on the road, when in essence, even at a workplace level, there are periods of probation where the person must go through a rigorous process until what the confirmation of what he has or she has is finalized. So I think for me, on these issues of road safety and so forth, as long as, in my view, if it does exist, I think we must agree it has got some loopholes. A road safety master plan. South Africans, if it's raining, massive accidents, for an example, they happen during rainy peak days. If there are too much rain, we know there will be a lot of fatality. But at that time, there's no testing that is being done. If it's raining, we are told the testing stations are closed. No testing is done at night. Most of the accidents happens at night. You don't even know that person except when you go to test the eyes there. So at a practical level, I think those are the limitations, which in my view, I'm saying, I appreciate the fact that there is that view that says to reduce, it's not only about expenditure. There is no one, I don't think myself sitting here, we can contest the issue of governance. That you can't have a state that could, that's why I said even to the department initially, if we don't have an overarching investment strategy or an investment plan from our state-owned entities, they will continue on this reliance that when things don't go well, the state must intervene, it must spend. And whether we like it or not, it's not an expenditure that comes from the air. It comes from the taxes that our people are paying. That, in my view, it's another way where we can make a contribution, enhance it. But I appreciate the fact that quite clearly, this is not a matter that we need to find a solution today. I can safely say when honorable members are asking this question, we should be saying that instead. I want to make it a point to say there is a need that some of these ideas must be shared also, because for sometimes our own processes of parliament, they take their own period. But I think there is a need for an interaction in between, including how do we manage the dissemination of information between the two entities. I think there has to be that role. I must say on the last question, to me, it raises issues even with the department. Look, when you've got a regulatory industry, and we're not questioning DG, how you operate, but I feel there is an unevenness. If we were to say, come here and present on how do you deal with tariff increases and so forth in terms of the electricity industry, I can assure you we're going to bring NERSA. Now, when we say bring in, when it comes to this one, SAF might be here, but I can't get their specific active role as an existing entity that is supposed to be working on this, even assisting you to look at different alternatives that have to be performed. I'm not saying what you present is not from them, and I can't question that, but I find that the manner in which sometimes the regulatory institutions, even when they are under one roof, they've got different manners and mechanisms that they operate. And I think that's why the question that was raised by Honorable Mahlaule to say, sometimes you don't get this thing that SAF is actively involved when it comes to these issues in relation to the fuel prices. But I'm leaving because I think from where we sit as a committee, we are going to find a way on how best do we deal, because the main focus now is the implication. And I think I agree, we need to do a thorough work on the cost implications of the fuel prices in the overall value chain, at the socio-economic implications thereof, so that we can be able to make a calculated cost, not on the basis of maybe we're just shocked. We must know, we know even in the mining space, in the mining industry, when you talk about the increase in fuel prices, definitely it's going to have implications. And at the end of the day, it may not encourage investment, whilst on the other side we're asking for it, because the input costs are going to be matched and they are going to be transferred. And in one way or the other, they may lead, instead of creating more employment, they may lead to more unemployment, because then there is a need to offset, whether we agree or we don't agree, but we have to mitigate against these unintended costs that are kicking in, the input costs that are kicking in. So I hope and I wish that there will be more close interaction. We see this. We may not agree on everything that you have presented, but we see this as a meaningful contribution on what we think is required. It may not be only you, we must also explain. There is no criteria we use to call you as AA. It's simple because we have heard your voice as an institution, as an entity. So I don't want tomorrow someone says, how did you pick up AA? No, we didn't use any formula, but I'm sure now with this information, members of the committee will formulate a better strategy going forward to say what then needs to be done. How do we ensure that each and every role player is making this contribution, so that even from where we sit as a committee of parliament, we can make a proper informed recommendations of what we think could be done to mitigate against. So for now, we have not taken a position. We take the views that you have presented to us, and we think they will seriously inform how we look at this thing now going forward. That's why I said we will deal with other issues. Honorable members, having said so, before I allow AA to make their closing remarks, and then we look on the next issue, do you allow me to allow them to make their closing remarks? Statement. Honorable Mashaule, wait a bit, Honorable Mashaule, want to make a point?
Yeah, allow them to make a closing statement, but in the closing statement, probably share with us why they think RAF should be privatized, wholly or semi. It doesn't matter. Why should it be privatized? Thank you.
Okay, AA.
Honourable Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to close final remarks. Let me start with answering the question on privatization. We believe that the involvement of a privatized entity would drive the acceleration of the management of the fund and provide commercial intervention from a privatized based solution to provide governance and transparency in terms of how the fund is administered, and to provide a better output and a better outcome in terms of the way the fund is administered. Guess what we are saying is that we believe a privately operated entity would be more agile and more dynamic in terms of dealing with the challenges rather than its current state and form. I hope that answers the question. And then in closing, thank you very much for allowing us, the audience and the platform, to share our views. Again, we are cooperative in our approach, and we are here for the benefit of the consumer and public at large. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity, and we are always here to avail ourselves for future forums to provide input and also share information that we have available. Thank you very much for that.
Oh, okay. I assume sometimes there was a break-in. No, thank you very much. We don't have to. We will look at different options. We don't have to agree with everything that you are raising, but I'm sure this committee is going to deliberate on what then has to be done from now going forward. DG.
Yes, Chair.
Are you ready or?
Yes.
Honorable members said they are sitting with their water and everything next to them. I won't mention the other part where they want to go there, that they'll go. Are you ready? The presentation is ready. I'm just asking you, your presentation is ready on the state of refineries.
Indeed, Honorable Chair, the presentation is ready. We can just perhaps get 5 minutes to organize ourselves, but we are ready, Honorable Chair.
No. If you want 5 minutes, it means you are not ready.
Okay, no, we can shoot straight, Chair. DDG Makubela?
We can give you, whilst we are watching, that you fly to the presentation and then you kick in.
Yes, Chair. Noted, Honorable Chair. DDG? Or maybe the Secretariat from Parliament can fly the presentation. Mrs. Matanta? Thank you very much. Yes, Chair, without any waste of time, Chair, I'm sure you have granted us an opportunity to start with the presentation, Chair. Is that in order?
Yes, continue, DJ.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Without any waste of time, I would like to invite DDG Makubela to take honorable members through the presentation. DDG?
So thank you very much, DG. Thank you, Chair. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes. Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you very much. Basically, what we are going to present this still morning is the state of petroleum refining in South Africa. I think that before I start, I think it's important, Chair and honorable members, to say that in our country and now in particular, it is very, we need to be circumspect, all of us, about, raising particular expectations in whatever we say and do, because things aren't as easy as they are made out to be. These are complex matters. I think that I will say this without any equivocation, that the South African petroleum regulatory system is amongst the best in the world. I'm not saying it because I am, part of the team that deals with that. I say this because from time to time, I look at other jurisdictions that do not produce oil and compare ourselves with those jurisdictions. If you were to remove the issues of fuel taxation, our regulatory, framework is amongst the best. If I want to compare, which I will perhaps towards the end of the presentation, to say that if you look at basically all our trading partners, their fuel prices are much higher than ours, and they operate in deregulated markets. I think it is still correct for the government to be involved in the determination of fuel prices, because that is cushioning those that are most vulnerable. Of course, there are improvements that need to be made. On the issue of refining, again, we need to be, if I move now to the next slide, we need to be quite circumspect when we look at these issues, because it's easy to make statements, but when you are faced with shortages of energy because of a decision that you made or was made at a particular point, responding to one particular pressure, you then plunge an economy into chaos. And this is what we try and balance in this sector. So by way of introduction, Chair and honorable members, we acknowledge that South Africa relies heavily on fuel, and of late, we rely on fuel for power generation. There is a significant amount of diesel that is consumed in power generation. And again, this is an area that at the time that the regulatory framework was developed, it had not anticipated that this would be the case. Secondly, it was indicated earlier, even by the DG, the next bullet points, that we rely heavily on imported fuel. In fact, all our crude oil that is used in the country is basically imported from other countries. And increasingly, as I indicated in the earlier presentation, we are now seeing that we are also importing petrol and significantly diesel. And that is a growing trend and is likely to get better. We don't have a proven resource. We have gas now that has been discovered and is being developed is going to be developed by Total in the Southern Cape. We're excited about this because it opens up an opportunity for natural gas vehicles going forward. We don't have a significant footprint of crude oil externally. We only have a 3% stake in a block in Ghana, but that is really very, very little. It cannot even cater for the needs of this economy. DG did indicate that there's employment of 110,000 people. 70,000 of them are in the service stations and dispense fuel to motorists. A very significant group of workers, which the regulatory environment continues to protect. The turnover was indicated by the DG. Can we move on to the next slide? Now, in terms of what we have as refining in the sector, we have installed capacity of 520,000 barrels per day of crude oil, and it is installed capacity. It doesn't mean that all of that capacity is currently available. And in addition, we have the CTL plant owned by Sasol with a nameplate capacity of 150,000 barrels per day. And then the Petrol plant, again, installed capacity, 45,000 barrels per day. We also have to indicate that these crude oil refineries were built in the 50s and 60s, all of them, with the engine having been streamed in 1954. So that is the oldest refinery that we have in the country. The CTL and GTL plants that I spoke to, Petrol and Sasol plants, were built in the 80s. Next slide, please. Now, here I just show the ownership as well as the location of these refineries. I think it's important to indicate here that the refineries, other than Petrol SA, all of them are owned by private sector companies, but also then to indicate that Sasol basically has got ownership in 2 of the refineries, one of which processes crude oil. Also, in terms of location, the 2 inland refineries, in our view, are very critical refineries because most of the demand for petroleum products is in the inland market. Next slide, please. Now, currently, what is happening is that we have 2 crude oil refineries that are not operational. These are the Astron and Engen refinery, one in Cape Town and the other one in Durban. Now, the Astron refinery suffered what one would call a catastrophic incident, which caused major damage after they had invested over R1 billion in upgrading the refinery. So what was also disturbing about that was the fact that we lost 2 of our compatriots, young engineers, and you know, it was quite unfortunate, very unfortunate, and disturbing. The other disturbing factor, as I indicated, was the fact that here was a new investor, spent over R1 billion upgrading the refinery, and then you know, such an incident happened. Now, that has taken out basically that refinery. I think I will talk to what is happening going forward with it. The Engen refinery suffered a fire in December, which caused extensive damage to the facility. The GTL facility owned by Petrol SA is currently not operational. So effectively, we have 3 refineries, 2 crude oil and the gas to liquid refinery that are not operational. And if you add that, effectively, it takes out 1/3 of the petroleum products, producing capacity of the country being out at the moment, which means that all of that capacity is currently then being imported. The other refineries are able to operate, but again, the reason I insisted on mentioning nameplate capacity is that all of them currently operate on average at 75%. Some may be 77%, and some, below that. But on average, they operate at 75% of nameplate capacity. Now, where do we locate this in the global environment? Because we felt that we need to locate this, the South African environment within the global environment. There is a rationalization currently worldwide of refineries, and where oil companies and the owners of these refineries are closing most of them down and converting them to terminals. One such organization which has made announcement is Shell, that they want to remain globally now, with between 6 and 8 refining centers. The rest will be turned into terminals. And currently, a Shell would have anything up to 18 refineries that are operational. So they want to offload most of those refineries. And this is driven mainly by the decarbonization strategies of most of the oil majors. Europe has actually seen most of the closures of refineries. Australia has seen 2 refineries closing. The US has also seen refineries, especially the smaller ones, closing, but Shell also they closed a mega refinery in Louisiana. Then refining is increasing, on the other hand, in Middle East and East Asia. Most of the new refineries being built are either in Saudi Arabia or India and China. And that's where most of the mega refineries are being built currently. And so the markets, the supply markets, even for South Africa, are shifting. As we speak now, most of our diesel imports come out of India. Now that has got an impact, and this is a shift that has just happened because of the refineries that were built in India. Now that, of course, has implications for us in that we have to then look at the BFP to say, is this a trend that is sustainable? What does it mean for BFP? Do we need to review? But we can't just, because the market has suddenly, people have found cheaper fuel in India to say, okay, let's change what we have. We are now going to adopt India, because I always have this view that India has got over 1 billion people. And currently the use of petroleum products in India is low, but they have a massive refining capacity. At the time that they need that fuel, they will redirect most of that export capacity towards their domestic needs. And this is something that as policy makers, we have to also look at. Next slide, please. Okay, if we continue on the global developments, I thought it would be important for me just to give a statistic to say that we basically, in refining capacity globally, Africa accounts for 3%, with Egypt leading the pack effectively in terms of refining capacity in the continent. We were number 2 in terms of crude oil refining. However, I think that number 2 spot will soon be taken by the Mr. Dangote's refinery because of the refineries in the country being out of commission. They have built in Nigeria a mega refinery, and we have actually begun to see some companies importing petrol from the refinery in Nigeria. And that is something that we would welcome, because it then boosts the intra-African trade, especially because the owner of that refinery resides in the continent. Worldwide, I think it is a fact that COVID-19 has accelerated the closure of some of the refineries in the continent, in the world, and I don't think we are being spared that as a country. So I did indicate this: oil majors are under pressure from shareholders globally to offload, assets that contribute to global warming. So the same phenomenon that we have seen in coal, where shareholders vote with their feet effectively to say that you either offload these CO2 emitting assets or we walk away with our money. And I think the majors themselves have responded as much as some of the mining companies have responded. So they have adopted net zero carbon strategies. Companies like BP And I think similarly, Shell is not following, but has also adopted similar strategies. There is also in Europe, which would also explain why in Europe the refineries are basically closing down even much faster. There is a faster transition in Europe to electric vehicles. And I think this then complicates investment plans for oil majors in particular, because how do you then invest in mega refineries when the car manufacturers have stated that they will stop producing internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030, some by 2040. So this accelerates closures. And I think the responses, even in our country, of the oil majors is driven by those considerations. Next slide, please. Now, what are the plans of the existing refiners? So effectively, we've had conversations and we continue to have conversations led by the DG with all the oil majors without exception. The engine has approached us and has expressed a wish, and I think that wish now has become a board decision on their part that they want to repurpose the refinery into an import terminal. What does this mean? This means that the current processing of crude oil in the NREF facility in Durban will stop. Now, I think that in our engagements, we said there must be an independent review that says that this refinery has reached the end of its life, and that investing in it actually there won't be any benefit. So that independent review was done, and the figures were marginal. Now, you can, as a regulator, if a shareholder decides that in terms of their facility, this is what they think can best benefit the shareholders, but also then security of supply, you have to consider that those discussions are ongoing. One commitment that we've received from them is that there will be no job losses. They have sufficient facilities and businesses at Engen to absorb the 780 permanent workers in the refinery, plus also all the other, I think it's about 110 that support the permanent workers. So they are in a process now of engaging organized labor to then see, how do they do that redeployment. The other complicating factor for Engen is the fact that the fire caused extensive damage. So the workers even now are idling. So what they have decided is that they will redeploy some of those workers into other activities. Astron, on the other hand, is committed to the option of restarting the refinery. I think because this was an accident, there are investigations by the likes of insurers of the facility to, I guess, determine if that was, in the nature of, doing work, or whether there was no negligence on the part of the company and so on. So those are things that are still ongoing between the insurer and the company. The Shell and BP are in the process of evaluating a number of options. And in fact, they have decided that the best option for them would be not to close the facility, They don't want to close the refinery. They want somebody else to operate. Now, what this does, of course, is that it reduces for both Shell and BP the number of facilities that are carbon emitting that sit within their stable. So they have an interest in the refined petroleum product, but they themselves would not want to operate that facility. So a process is currently underway to look for a suitable person or in the name of a company that can actually operate, and that they are doing independently as shareholders of Shell and BP. I think, Chair and honorable members, we prefer this option rather than a closure or converting of a refinery. If there can be somebody else to operate the refinery optimally, then it's better for South Africa because we don't lose in terms of security of supply, because we only talk about petrol and diesel, but there's jet fuel, which is quite sensitive. So you can imagine if you bring jet fuel into the country and it's off spec, that then causes a number of challenges for the country in terms of operating airline. Then on Petrol SA, there are plans to obtain feedstock for the refinery. What I think here, I must say, is that at the time that the refinery stopped operating, they were already producing about between 15 to 18,000 barrels per day. We feel the absence of the refinery, but it's not as significant as the first two. Sasol and Total, on the other hand, have not indicated any major changes in strategy. I think what we've heard from Sasol in particular is that there's going to be a lot more emphasis on reducing the carbon footprint. That would mean that they may be considering the feedstock, changing the feedstock that is used in one of the facilities. But we are engaging them on a regular basis, and in fact, DG has got monthly engagements with all these companies. What are the implications then on security of supply? We think that, Chair and honorable members, that this needs to be a managed process. We did engage, led by the minister, with Shell and BP. Also, minister met with the engine shareholders from Petronas. This is all part of a process of managing how this transition is happening, so that we don't just wake up and we have new shareholders and we have refineries closing all over the place. So it does have impact on security of supply if you don't manage the closure of refineries carefully. So one of the things that I did mention is that petrol and diesel is the only thing that we think about, but there is paraffin that, the closure of NREF actually created paraffin shortages in the East Coast, particularly Eastern Cape and KZN. But of course, now that is being catered for through imports. The two incidents, so you have two fires, you have two refineries closing, but you don't have shortages of fuel. In our view, it really, to some extent, demonstrates the robustness of the supply system that we have. We think that investment in the new multi-purpose pipeline was basically, a very good decision, because now we can bring fuel inland directly from imports if something happens to the refineries. There is a need for continuous improvements of performance in terms of our ports. I think there was a discussion on demurrage in the last presentation. So it is important that we have efficient ports. Otherwise, any delay on imports does impact the economy. We were in this committee some few years ago to defend the new import terminal that was built in Cape Town, when one of the majors was actually opposed to it. Now that actually has become a savior even for that major that was opposed to that at the time. We did say at the time that it is important to have import terminals built in the country. There have been investments in Cape Town, Durban. There's one now that is being proposed for the Kucha area because the Port Elizabeth facility will be closing soon and be converted into a waterfront. So a new import terminal will then be built in the Kucha area. Richards Bay and Maputo are quite key. There's been a number of investments, particularly on LPG in Richards Bay, to such an extent that we believe that if we manage the imports properly, there shouldn't be any shortage of LPG in the inland market because of that massive facility in Richards Bay. The Maputo in Mozambique has also become an important supply route for the country. And so whatever we lose in the refineries that are closing, you are able to bring block trains from Maputo into the inland market, but also then through road, you're also able to supply out of Maputo. So what happens really in the northern part of Mozambique, we do trust that it does not filter down to the southern part, because then that begins to have an impact on our security of supply as well. The other implications are that in terms of socio-economic now is that refineries have an average of 1,000 employees. So any closure immediately has an impact on 1,000 employees, unless those employees can be, something can be found for them. And that would need to also be sustainable and to be equivalent. So we wouldn't want people to move and then they have less, meaningful employment, especially in terms of their benefits. The closure of refineries does lead to deindustrialization. And this is something also that we need to internalize. Just candles, the closure of the NREF facilities means that the wax that is used for candles, the candle making factory effectively is threatened. I mean, these are things that we take for granted, but this is the reality. So you lose also engineering expertise. What do you do to those mechanical engineers, the chemical engineers that are busy studying now? They have less opportunities when they leave university, because there's far less work in import terminals than there is in a refinery. Then the other issue is that we import high value products. So instead of importing crude and adding value to the crude, we then have to import high value refined products. So these would be your petrol and diesel, When it's imported, it's of higher value, and that has got impact on balance of payment, a higher one, because of that margin. You also now have to import base chemicals that are used, your benzenes, your toluene and xylene and all of that. Those would need to be imported because the refinery is no longer producing them. Then bitumen for our road infrastructure becomes impacted. And I think very importantly, I think for the likes of ESCOM is fuel oil. Because when a power plant goes down to restart it, you need fuel oil. Now that, I think, is an area that, of course, we know ESCOM has started looking at investing in storage facilities for fuel oil, because I think they've realized that this will not be readily available as they need it going forward. So as I move towards conclusion, what are the policy considerations? I think we need to accept, Chair and honorable members, that there are changes globally, and we're not immune to those changes. So there are changes in mobility requirements, which have been made worse by COVID-19. So people are working from home. So the demand for liquid fuels has reduced. And that phenomenon is likely to be with us for perhaps the foreseeable future. There is also electrification of the transport fleet. So, countries like Finland, I don't think that, the way that the electric vehicles have penetrated that market, they basically are having less discussions and sleepless nights about petroleum products. So these are having impact on the policy choices, and these are things that we have to engage and discuss as a country. What do they mean? We want to say that we should avoid at all costs the closure of an additional refinery. And that needs to really not happen. The one realization we've come to is that not all existing refining capacity can be saved forever. And I think that we need to prepare that as this closes, do we have something that will make sure that we don't have shortages? Very importantly, the inland refineries are very key to security of supply, because unlike other economies, our economic hub is in the inland. And so even the biggest requirements in terms of jet fuel is the OR Tambo Airport. If you were to lose a NATREF, for example, you then impact the ability to supply OR Tambo with jet fuel immediately. So I think these are some of the policy considerations that we have to contend with and have solutions for. We think that the restarting of the Astron refinery is desirable, and we continue to engage with Astron to find out how far the discussions are and when the repairs can start. The restarting of Mossel Bay is critical for gas utilization. We're saying this because there's gas that has been found by Total in the Southern Cape. The natural market for perhaps a percentage of that is the GTL refinery. So restarting that refinery and perhaps not quickly converting it into a liquid is the best way to go. And I know that at some point there were considerations of converting it to a liquid processing facility. We don't believe that there is a need for that now, because the gas is there. There's no doubt about it, and it's sufficient enough to sustain. I think what we need to then have a discussion on is how quickly that gas gets, developed and produced so that it can feed that refinery. The robust management of imports, I think our discussions with Transnet, because they are the ones who manage the ports, so we need to make sure that there's traffic flow, because there are going to be a number of vessels now coming into Durban. There are a number of vessels coming into Cape Town because of the closure of Astron. So we need to really manage that, but also we need to make sure that people don't take advantage of the import framework to disadvantage the local refineries, because then we will accelerate their closure. Because if they cannot place their product in the market, then there won't be a need for them to continue to operate. I think lastly on this policy consideration is something that we really have to engage with, that as a country we need to be decisive on natural gas vehicles. We need to move. On electric vehicle entry, we need to move. Hydrogen fuel, I think there's already a movement there. We've seen the likes of Anglo, we've seen the likes of Sasol. There's movement there, but we need to make sure that we encourage and sustain that, because we have sufficient platinum to support any hydrogen-based fuel going forward. Then the alternative, if we don't do all of these other things, we then have to build a mega refinery. Now, we would need to then balance that mega refinery against the future that is envisaged by car manufacturers of not having internal combustion engines by certain years. So these are policy choices that need to be made. But on all of them, whichever one we choose, we need to be decisive. In conclusion, Chair, honorable members, we are saying that global petroleum refining is undergoing fundamental changes, very fundamental, and we're not immune. Decarbonization is a driving factor of the oil majors. We did indicate that at least one crude oil refinery is likely to close. One refinery will change ownership, but will remain operational. The imports of refined products will increase significantly in the short to medium term. We think that investment on import infrastructure is a no-regret option. And that this is something that we also have to internalize. I think we then are saying that we must use all these changes as opportunities to broaden local ownership of petroleum infrastructure, local ownership, as well as the transformation of the petroleum sector. I think this is a significant opportunity because there are changes. If we miss this one, I think the future generations will not forgive us. With that, Chairperson, would like to thank you.
Thank you very much, DDG. Chair, that is a detailed presentation from the DDG. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, DG. Maqhubela. Good time. Ngizazi leziduko zamaqhubela uba ngobani ngaze za DG phela. Ngelinye ilanga they will tell me. Honorable members, there is the presentation. Any take? I see the hand of Honorable Mailam. Okay, it seems that's the only hand for now. Honorable Matoba, yes. Okay. I'll see others on the way. Honorable Mailam.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, Mr. Makubela, for your presentation. It was most informative. I'm very concerned about the fact that over 40% of our refining capacity is currently offline and that we're having to import refined fuels. Now, what I don't know and what we didn't really pick up in this presentation is what is the cost differential between imported refined fuels and locally produced refined fuels? Is there a differential? I don't know. And I would really like to get a better feel whether it's cheaper to refine crude locally or to import already refined products. The second question that I have relates to the presentation kind of hammered home that there's a need for mega refineries, but around the world, we're seeing a lot of small refineries that are addressing niche markets or niche communities. And in this regard, I'd like to know what the department is doing to encourage companies, small companies, new entrants to the market to establish their own refining capacity. And I'm not talking about refining from crude or from gas, but from other products. Now, one of the things that concerns me is that Section 2B, subsection 6 of the Petroleum Products Act limits production of petroleum products to coal, natural gas, and vegetable matter. And I think that definition probably needs to be expanded. It does make provision for the fact that those should be procured first before other products, but I think that there's an opportunity, especially as technology has improved significantly since 2003, when that amendment was moved, that the definition or the limitation be expanded to allow, for example, the generation of diesel from waste materials. So, Chairperson, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mailam. Honorable Matoga.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I have about 6-7 points. I do not have the slides, unfortunately, so I'll just go through the presentation as it is. I think the first one, it is on the issue of the 2 refineries that had to close because of fires. And I remember when we did our oversight in, I think it was Saldanha, if I'm not mistaken. And SFF, they showed us, or they told us about their alarm system that they were using, which seemed very proactive, if I may put it that way, and very effective as well. And I just wanted to perhaps look into whether we could look into making sure that similar technologies can be used in all the refineries. And maybe we can make sure that also becomes part of the health and safety regulations, because not only are we losing infrastructure, but we're also losing human lives, and therefore we're losing breadwinners. So if we could look into those technologies so that we make sure that the fires that are ravaging our refineries could actually be detected on time and they could be stopped on time, that is one. And then the second one, I think it's the one of the rationalization of refineries, with the fact that worldwide that is the trend. However, Middle East and East Africa are actually looking into increasing their refineries. And then also that India and China are also looking into creating like mega refineries. I understand that South Africa at this point in time, it is still contemplating where it should go. But I just wanted to find out, when we weigh the pros and cons of going with the world, which is far advanced than we are in terms of resources and in terms of everything, compared to what I would then say it's these booming economies or countries that were third world countries at one point like we were, would it not maybe make sense for us to actually model their approach to the refineries? And then number 3, I think the presentation spoke about the importance of Richards Bay and Maputo in particular. I understand that we're supposed to have a meeting yesterday, and the chairperson did outline why we could not have that meeting. But I just wanted to find out there as well, considering the fact that we have said that Maputo is actually very key in also assisting in addressing some of the challenges that we're having with refineries. What is the conversation that DMRE is having around the crisis that is in Mozambique? And then also, I just wanted to say as well that perhaps in addition to, I think I agree and I welcome the closing remarks of DDG as well, on the fact that we really need to take this opportunity, number one, to ensure that as we build up this industry going forward, we must make sure that transformation happens. And we also need to push very hard for the local ownership of these refineries, because there's no better time for us to do that. But I also just wanted to perhaps look into that, as much as we need to maintain what we have right now in terms of the refineries that South Africa has, we really need to also have the conversation concurrently and not separately about the need to invest in renewable energy resources, because that is basically where everyone is going right now. I think we're even speaking about that. Even the cars that are being produced, they'll be using electricity, they'll be using renewable energy and all these things. So we also need to also have those conversations concurrently, because in most cases, we actually have these two conversations in silos. And then number 5 as well, I think it is important that as we are having this conversation as well about refineries, we really need to look into producing as much skills that will make sure that whatever trajectory we take into, we have enough people and enough skill set to actually see through whatever ventures we take. And therefore, I would actually also say that maybe we should look into the establishment of an independent research institute, which would prioritize research on energy security and support. And then it would also, and support energy infrastructure planning. And then this could also just perhaps be done in collaboration with DHET and the Ministry of Science and Technology, where we should also have like specialized courses that will look into specific skills that we project we will need in the future. And not only that, but we also need to establish industries that will manufacture all the equipment and technologies that will be needed for our energy supplies going forward, which means that some of the courses that must be in that institute must actually look into this, so that we do not actually have an idea, but now we don't have the skills to actually implement them. And then I think that is all from me for now, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Okay, DJ.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Mr. Matkubela.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, Honorable Chair, and thanks, honorable members. Maybe let me start with the questions from Honorable Myla. What we were trying to say on the issue of okay, let me start with the first question. I think the BFP, where we actually can demonstrate that it is adequate, rewards adequately, is the fact that no player in the market has come back to us to say, I cannot import petroleum products competitively into the market. So there's been no request for any changes or adjustments done, which then for us, is an indication that BFP adequately caters for imports as well. So it is really an import parity price. So we don't believe that the consumer is going to be impacted negatively by imports in terms of pricing. However, we need to monitor the impact on the security of supply. And how we deal with that is by building infrastructure, storage inland, as well as the import terminals on the coast. We are not saying that we need a mega refinery in the country. We think that there is room for that. We do, however, say that given the move to electric vehicles, we need to think about that very carefully. We had been very excited when Saudi Aramco had decided that they would build a refinery in Richards Bay. However, when COVID struck, they then, as we indicated earlier, they cut 50% of their capital expenditure. So I think that is still an option. However, I think everyone now is looking at all this whole decarbonization drive, but also the fact that there'll be electric vehicles coming in the next decade. I think opportunity for refiners is there. We would welcome discussions with anyone who wants to build a refinery in the country of any kind. We, as I indicated, we're having discussions now on on hydrogen fuel with the likes of Anglo and Sasol. And of course, at the right time, because these are listed companies, the announcements would then be made. But the discussions are not about refineries as such, but it's about how do we support the hydrogen economy going forward, what needs to be in place. Very importantly, the issue of skills that was raised by Honorable Matokwe is part of that discussion, to say that we are not going to import the skills. The skills must be local. And that those are the discussions that we're having. We would want to thank Honorable Milam, because I think there is an opportunity then to amend the Act. We will look at that because if it is inhibiting, it's something that we need to look at. So on the issue of the fires, I think the one fire because you deal with volatile substances, the fire at Astron was actually an explosion. And so I think most of the companies have invested a lot on fire detection equipment. But that one, from time to time, unfortunately, in fact, globally, you have these incidents in refineries. I think there was one recently in very unfortunate one, I think, in Indonesia. And I think technologies are always being added to detect the leakages of chemicals, as happens in the mining sector as well. But that one, as I said, is still under investigation as to exactly what caused such a catastrophic explosion. The fire in engine did not result in any loss of life. No one was injured, fortunately. But of course, it did damage the refinery to a significant extent. But we take note of the need to look at the fire protection. And this is an area that the Department of Employment and Labor, through the Chief Inspector of Machinery, is always looking at. I think on the refining, why Middle East and East Asia? In the Middle East, they are building refineries because they have crude oil. So Saudi Arabia took a decision that instead of exporting just oil, they will beneficiate their own oil in their country and export it. So they have also invested in these mega refineries in their own country. Similarly, I think the decision that was taken by Mr. Dangote in Nigeria was to say, we have oil in Nigeria, but we are importing a petroleum product. So he then decided to invest in refining capacity closer to the well. And this is something that when I said it would be a shame if the Petrol SA facility is not taking advantage of the gas that's going to be produced in a well that is close to them. So similarly, I think as we find hydrocarbons, let's make use of them, let's beneficiate them in our country. And so far, we've only found gas through Total in this country. The East Asia, I think the issue there is about the distance from the countries that produce crude oil. I think India and China took a decision that with their population as well as industrialization drive, they will invest in refining. What was interesting about India is that those refineries are built as export refineries. So they are not built to supply the domestic market. They were built as export refineries, and they are really exporting. But I believe that at some point they will turn those export refineries as their need for petroleum products increases. In our country, I think that I will say this, the Mtombo refinery should have happened. If we had gone ahead with the Mtombo refinery at the time, we would not be where we are today. And I think that investment would have sufficiently paid for itself before the electric vehicles come in. I think the difficulty now is that you then say, given that we're going to have hydrogen fuel, we're going to have, natural gas vehicles, can you really sustain a mega refinery? I don't have an answer to that, but these are questions that we have to answer because somebody will ask them. Maputo, I think the government continues to engage with the government of Mozambique. We have made our concerns quite clear through the DG about what an escalation downwards of that challenge would mean for us. and we think that the right authorities know exactly what Mozambique means for South Africa's energy security. The issue of transformation, definitely, I think if we lose this opportunity, then I think that we will not be knowing what we're doing really. On skills, as I indicated, in all our discussions with all the companies, but I've mentioned just Anglo and Sasol, we are talking about the need for to develop local skills and local companies that can manufacture the components that are going to be used in these industries. We do acknowledge the fact that renewables, particularly in this case, the move to hydrogen fuel is something that we must accept that is happening. Electric vehicles, I think we need to be more decisive there, because it is a matter of time before there are no internal combustion engines. And then, we need to make sure that we're ready for that. Thank you very much, Chair and honorable members. Thanks, DG.
Thank you, DDG. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I don't know, I see the end of Honorable Madoga, but I saw that it had not gone down since that time. I assume is the old one. Honorable members, if you allow me, can I make the following proposal? That having received these reports, mostly and mainly, we will request the Secretariat, together with the researcher, in this case on the energy side, Ubaba Umaboda, to just work out sort of a compiled report on the two presentations and highlight the key proposal areas. And then we will have a discussion ourselves as a committee now, so that we don't just get the presentations, but as a committee, we'll get to have a proper discussion. I think two things that will have to emerge out of that discussion. The first one is that what are the immediate issues or interventions that needs to be made in dealing with those issues? What are the medium-term issues that we think in the, not in the immediate, but in the near future, we need to respond to? For an example, we may feel that for now, this is what has to be done, taken as an immediate intervention. But we may feel that some of those issues may not respond on this now, but they have to be considered. For an example, whether local or domestic taxation is something that we think it must be taken with extreme urgency, or it should form the medium approach. There are issues that could be a little bit of a longer term or mid-long term, like if there is a need for an amendment on legislation or on policy issues, we must be able to look at those issues. But lastly, we must look at long term. There are issues of technological advancement, there are issues of long-term investment, whether you talk about other further consideration in terms of the alternative, your hydro energy, hydro fuel, or whatever that is in that package. I think that's what will help the committee now to make a proper determination. The reason I was saying in short term or medium term, there are issues that may fall outside the ambit of this committee, but in the current, they require the attention of the committee. Like, for instance, I was raising, part of the report that was raised were reforms or reinforcements that required to be considered. We may not be the committee on transport, but how do we deal with the issue of road safety regulations, including issues that relate to the lack of safety nets as far as public funds are concerned. So they may not fall on us, but we can be able to make concrete proposals of what needs to be refined in the meantime. For an example, what is it that we can do to strengthen the regulations with regards to the issue of the provision of driver's licenses, safety training, and so forth, and all those issues. There could be other long-term issues that members were talking about, which we must put a better way of packaging them, whether we say completely overhaul the fuel pricing system that we are having, bring in new legislations or regulations that will put, for an example, diesel as one of the strategic areas that will require to be a little bit much more regulated. So I'm just saying, if that team can work on this thing for the first, so that we have got a structured discussion that provides clarity of direction, that this is the direction from a committee point of view we're taking. We will try and expedite that process, other members. If we can do it next week, but I don't want to promise next week now, but we need to take this with the extreme agency that it deserves. Two other issues that we think are critical, process-wise, is whether is it allowed or we'll come back, even if that proposal it can be considered. We'll already have done a little bit of administrative research work on it. Whether we should get not a too open process, but a two-pronged process. One, a process where we can put our heads together in a much more broader consultative meeting. Some will call it a workshop, others will call it a symposium, whatever, or a different meeting, whether you call it a colloquium. I don't think I'm more interested, but where we could put all our heads together. Once we look at that, we'll also must be looking at to what extent can we broaden the views without a long process, just broadening the views in terms of a consultative exercise. I don't want to use the word public hearings because there could be too much interest on that, but a very streamlined, manageable process of how best opinions can be processed, so that when we finally make a determination and a recommendation, we would have had to some degree a broader interaction, and then say from where now we have got these different views from different people, and this is what we think has to happen. I think for me that is if members allow us to follow that route, we'll come back with a report that will be looking at all the issues that have been raised so far, categorize them, and then as a committee we deliberate on those issues in the form of a report. And then I was suggesting that amongst other things, we may not discuss it now, when we come back, we can look on a very shortened further process of getting more other views, but in a very consolidated, if they see that word is correct, very consolidated, managed process of getting a little bit of, maybe we allow some few submissions if there are people who can make submissions as alternatives. And based on that, they can then help us to start looking at this issue much deeper. To honorable members, then when we meet next week, even if we are not dealing with this issue, we will then give a response to members and be able to, if we can finalize even that report by next week, we will just distribute the report to honorable members so that they can start familiarizing themselves with that report before we go to a committee discussion, both on the contents of what it says, based on what was presented. We have not discussed, we don't know what are the opinion or the views of other members. We may even consider that beyond this committee only, we might need to give an opportunity to other committees who may be impacted upon on these issues that we're proposing. For an example, one might argue and say it might give more of an added advantage if you move the RAF, the Road Accident Fund, you move it there, because the more any other form of transportation that is produced that has got a potential to be involved or to cause an accident, it can then, from the word go, be the one, and therefore it may be more effective compared to the current system that we are using. I'm just saying that that there could be such an argument that is being made. So if members agree, we can then present if the next week how far. If we happen by the course of this week to do that work, we will indicate to members in time, on time, and then we'll take that process forward. Do members support such an idea? If you are silent, you were supposed to finish at 4:30. I will wait here until 4:30. Honorable Mylem, and I see the hand of still on Honorable Matlock. Honorable Mylem.
Chairperson, I agree with you. Let's move forward.
Okay. Any second to what Honorable Mylem says?
Yes, second, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Honorable Lorima. We will come back to you. We will discuss as a committee. We'll agree on a way forward how to handle this thing. We will do it expeditiously as possible. It's a burning issue for the country. Is there any other matter, Ari, before I go and close the meeting, besides the announcement on the next meeting next week?
Nothing from my side, Chair.
Okay. Honorable members, next week we are dealing with the issue of the electricity and what do you call it? The risk adjustment. Yes.
Yes.
That is what we'll be dealing with. When? What is the date, Ari? I don't want to mention a date.
Tuesday, the 20th, Chair, at 9 o'clock.
Yes, we will be dealing with that, honorable members. Until such time, you are released very early from the time that was allocated. To the department, thank you very much for being here. And so is the same to AA. We appreciate your presence. The meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.